In, I don't know how helping someone die in a war is letting them down. I would have assumed that it would be the opposite. And then the other way is that they tell them that they have no legal right to refuse deployment, but every soldier has the legal right to refuse the deployment when the war is illegal. And it got to the point where most of us never saw the doctor because we knew exactly what was going to happen. We would get a pregnancy test, and then that would be it. So a lot of us avoided going to the doctor because we knew we had other bases we were going to have training at, so we assumed that we could go there too. When we got to our next duty station, we found out that they didn't have services for women there because they didn't think we were going to be there long enough. So this meant that we didn't have access to birth control or any gynecological services that we needed. But one of the things that was most devastating was what was available for us when we were serving overseas in a base that was there for people to deploy from. So the people that were stationed there a lot of times were people who would go to Iraq, but then instead of returning back to the United States, they returned to this base. And while we were there, they had services there for if the women were pregnant, and it was for the dependents to active duty as well. But they only had usually one doctor, one OB on hand at a time. So if anything happened to the woman while she was pregnant, she would have to be medevaced on a plane, and the doctor would have to go with her, and that would leave the base with no doctor. I talked to some of the women who were forced on these evacuations, and they were not the best situation for a woman to give birth. And one case in particular, a teenage mother became pregnant and they had to do an emergency C-section. So they put her on the plane with no drugs, and while on the flight, the stitches in her stomach opened up and she started to bleed all over the plane. And then when she got to the second base, they didn't have anything waiting for her at the tarmac, so she had to walk to the car to get taken to the hospital. The women who were sent there to have their babies would stay in the hospital if they were in the NICU, but the women weren't allowed to stay in the hospital. They had to stay across base. And so if the mothers had to go and feed the babies, they would have to walk back and forth in the hot weather to take care of the babies. So some of the women, they would start hemorrhaging while they were making these walks across base to take care of their children.
I think as much as the recruiters are responsible for murdering our children, I think we need to get out there and realize that we're all recruiters by allowing the military to have in our country. I think what we really need to do is find what these recruiters are exploiting, like the sense of nationalism or patriotism, and let these people know that they don't have to wear a uniform to be a patriot. One of the most common arguments I hear is, well, who's going to defend our country? And I'll tell you right now that if my country ever needs to be defended, I've got a rifle in the closet, and I don't need to have someone to rule my whole life.
Absolutely. And talk to recruiters, let them know that these are our schools, and they're not welcome there. They're not welcome to come and take our young people and send them off to a war to kill people they don't know for reasons that they probably don't understand. And yeah, absolutely. Every recruiter you see, let him know to get out.
Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I believe this is a very important book that any peace activist should read and soak in. It may sound confusing, but really the same strategies that we apply to war can equally be applied to peace because it is in conflict. And here is something that I would like to read from Sun Tzu. When asked how to cope with the great host of the enemy in orderly array and on the point of marching to the attack, I should say, begin by seizing something which your opponent holds dear, then he will be amenable to your will. And we must think of the military-industrial complex, the system that perpetuates war. What do they hold dear most? What do they need essentially to commit these acts of terror? And that is the people and money. If there is no one to pull a trigger, and if they don't have any money to spend on a trigger, they cannot make war. Since I've been downrange, I know what those real dollar bills turn into. They turn into real bullets and real bombs that kill real people. To think that just the soldiers are the ones who have blood on their hands is false. It's indirect, a very much more distant way of feeding the war that is really hard to see. And when faced with that we all, if you pay taxes, contributed to the horrors, not only in Iraq, but in Palestine, where we gave $30 billion of our tax money to Israel, $20 billion to Saudi Arabia, the #1 human rights violators, according to Amnesty International. There's one or two in China, but they're up there. We have a military base in 141 other countries. There's only 190 countries on the planet. We spend over 50% of our taxes on war. That needs to stop.
I want to start by talking about the defeat of the U.S. in Vietnam. After its defeat in Vietnam, the U.S. empire was greatly set back in terms of its ability to project power in the world at the expense of its global rivals. And I would say I think that's a good thing that happened. Now, the aim of every administration since Nixon has been to renew the ability of the U.S. military to freely intervene in the world and project the interests of the American corporate class. And that's what's been happening ever since then. For time's sake, I'm going to skip the 70s, 80s, and 90s and just jump to W and Obama. What I want to say is that there's a great deal of continuity when you go from administration to administration. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, Bush and the neocons announced the global war on terror. In my view, this was just a political mask for an ambitious agenda to use the U.S.'s military power to lock in for the long term its hegemony in the world. And really, the long-term view sees China as its main competitor in the world. That was what Bush did. Barack Obama's goal, I think, is nothing less than to salvage and rehabilitate the prestige of U.S. military power. That's what he has to do for the ruling class, which supported him in big time. Now, Obama may be steering back to a more Clinton-esque style and emphasizes humanitarian, again with quotes, intervention, targeting non-state actors, reliance on partners, proxies, and so forth. So there's a change in style and tone, but there's style and tone, but there's also fundamental continuity, and the goals remain the same.
We should also help grow the other media that is here and support these people, like No Strings Attached. Please forgive me if I'm forgetting anybody else. I'm sorry? Rag Blog is here. Support alternative media, support indie media, support. About other people, but support and grow the positive, y'all. The positive is here, and give the people with the media here a round of applause. If liberty and democracy are to be truly saved, they will only be by non-violent resistance, no less brave, no less glorious than violent resistance, and it will be indefinitely braver and more glorious, because it will give life without taking it.